Good morning. I'm Ronnie Cummins from Organic Consumers Association and Regeneration International, and we're going to have a panel now, Soil Matters, and we've got three speakers, and then I'll say a little bit at the end of the panel. One second here. Okay. Well, I just want to remind everyone how much progress we've made over the last 5 years in, as a movement, a regeneration movement, the organic and regeneration movement, farmers, consumers, climate activists. 5 years ago, when we were talking about these things, it was new to a lot of people. Very hard to get the media to pick up on this, impossible to get members of Congress and most state legislators and local people to talk about this. Now, lots of people are talking about this. It's becoming more and more understood that not only do we have to go to 50% or more reductions in fossil fuel use in the next decade, but we got to suck down as much carbon as possible from the atmosphere at the same time. And the only way to do this is through natural photosynthesis of organic and regenerative food farming land use. So we're going to have some excellent speakers today. The first speaker we'll have is Diana Donlon from Soil Centric. And we'll have each of the speakers for about 10 or 12 minutes. We've got a timekeeper out there, and then we will, I'll say a few words, and then we'll have some discussion if there's time. So Diana Donlon first.
Good morning, Soil Not Oil. Thank you for inviting me to present here today. I run a small nonprofit called Soil Centric, and my background is actually in content creation for this movement. I guess maybe my claim to fame, if I have one, is in 2015 at the COP21, the Paris Climate Conference, a short film that I produced called Soil Solutions to Climate Problems was played by the French government at their pavilion at COP21, and Michael Pollan narrated it, and it's been translated into multiple languages around the world, including Chinese and Finnish and you name it. And that concise little film kind of outlines the problem. So I went off on my own about a year ago and was going to continue down this road of content creation because I really like producing short films and writing blogs and doing that sort of thing. But along the way, I kept running into young people primarily who would say, hey, can we grab coffee? I really want to pick your brain about how to get into regenerative agriculture. And I thought, yeah, sure. And then another, email, text, phone call saying the same thing. And I thought, there's got to be some place to send all these people because clearly people want to help. So I met a young fellow who was working in tech, and he said, there's got to be more to my life than making factory floors more efficient. I read Chris Olson's book called The Soil Will Save Us, but I haven't the slightest idea how to get into this field. So at that point I thought, well, gosh, we're going to have to build something to get people into this movement. So, let's see how this thing works. Our mission at Soil Centric is to accelerate engagement in regenerative agriculture. So when young people, primarily, when anybody goes to the internet and says, like, hey, how do we solve climate change? Clearly, they Google it. And this is what they're told. They're told to stop driving, stop eating meat, and stop using plastic straws. But they aren't told, they're told what not to do, but they aren't told what to do, right? So we know from Elizabeth's presentation and from Seth's upcoming presentation and Josie and Ronnie and so forth that regenerative agriculture has the potential to address so many interrelated problems simultaneously. And some of the other speakers will go into what those are, but basically you know that it solves for drought and famine and resiliency and so many things at once. It almost seems too good to be true. Our friend and colleague Dee Dee Pershouse says, what's the problem? Soil's the answer. So we need sort of a flexible tool that will guide each person to the regenerative path that's right for them, because some people are born into farming and ranching, and some people get degrees in finance, some people are school teachers, but everybody has an interest in addressing this problem. But right now, if you go to the internet and you Google this, you get usually a static list that will say, watch these videos, read these books, but it won't distinguish between somebody who maybe has been doing this for a long time and somebody who just learned about the opportunity today. So we're building what we're calling the Pathfinder Tool, and it will help you discover these different partners in regeneration, like Elizabeth was talking about. It will point you in the direction of her workshop or the agroforestry class at Mesa. And you just get there and ask you basic questions, and then based on your responses, this is kind of a nod to Gabe Brown, who everybody, he's kind of the poster child for this movement, but if you know as much as Gabe Brown, you probably don't need our tool. And then, based on your responses, we make recommendations. So, for instance, if you just want to do something really straightforward and easy, and you don't have a lot of time, but you want to do something, it would recommend something like this. Change your web browser to Ecosia, and you will, every single time that you use a search engine, it will plant appropriate trees. It does reforestation all over the world. They have tree nurseries that employ people. And then there's this really cool little counter up at the top right that says, hey, George, you have planted 3,000 trees. And then that makes you feel great, and the next time you go, you've planted 3,001 trees. So on our tool, we give you a little overview of what the offering is, and then we provide what we're calling a pro tip. And the pro tip is something that sort of will let you know whether or not this opportunity is appropriate for you. So for instance, say you want to have an educational opportunity. You could say, I prefer to learn online, I prefer to learn in the field, and then it will customize the opportunities based on what you tell it. So here's a little example of a really cool thing I aspire to doing someday, and that is going to Cowgirl Camp. Now, Cowgirl Camp is something that's offered up in Washington State, and you don't have to have a farming or ranching background, but you can go to Cowgirl Camp for, I believe it's 10 days, and they teach you the basics. And so we talked to our friend Judy Schwartz, who actually went to this camp, and she said, here's my tip. Go all in and do the camping thing. You can stay nearby in a hotel. You might look more refreshed than those sleeping in the tents, but there's something special about learning about animals, caring for the land, and then sleeping outside, and waking up to the rising light over the pastures and seeing and hearing the sheep or horses or cattle, depending on where you are. Plus, there's all the off-hour chatting, laughing, and singing. It's very casual. You share 2 bathrooms with the family in the house, but it's super good spirit and worth rolling with it. So that little insider pro tip will tell you if you think, oh, maybe this is too rustic for me, or, oh, this is just what I want, sign me up, okay? So we are hoping that this tool will help the regenerative agriculture movement grow. We're also working with farmers and ranchers and land stewards to make it useful to them, because there are plenty of farmers and ranchers and land stewards out there that are interested in making this transition, but again, they might not be sure how to go about it, so they can go and plug in on the site, and it will make slightly different offerings to them, but it will say like, hey, what's going on in my state? And you can say, oh, I'm in Missouri, what's in Missouri? Or I'm in Tennessee, what's in Tennessee? I'm in Alaska. So it will sort by location, And we would love to have you sign up and help us beta test the tool. That's where we are right now. And if you go to soilcentric.org and give us your email, we will send you a link, and then you can give us feedback and tell us what you think. And also, if you know of regenerative opportunities, we have hundreds of them in our database. We're rolling them out 50 or so at a time because we want to make sure that we avoid greenwashing, that every single thing in there is solid. But we are a pretty small team and we don't know everything, so if there are some fantastic opportunities that you're aware of that you don't find, please shoot us an email and say, hey, you got to have, Joe's Regenerative Camp on your site. And speaking of camps, Ronnie's got a really cool one down in Mexico that's on our site. So thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Well, thank you, Diane. And the next speaker will be Seth Itzkan, he's co-founder of Soil4Climate.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Soil Not Oil 2019. Yay! So this is a center of hope. And I was just thinking, well, what can I say to this group that's different than the normal, talk that I give? And it really is that there's hope in the world. And I know that it can be very depressing a lot, and sometimes, frankly, I just start crying in the middle of the day. And friends of mine are getting sick, cancer. I just had a bout with cancer, and I'm lucky I got through as unscathed as I did. And as soon as I get back to Boston, I'm seeing medical oncology and radiative oncology, and that sucks, frankly. I don't know how long I'll be here, but I've seen a new generation of people who really get it, and I feel like when I come here, there's hope. That's really my main message. Now, thank you. Now, how are we doing with my presentation? Do I need to hit an advance button or something like that? 30 seconds, okay, so that's fine. So I'm representing Soil4Climate, that's the name of the organization. I'm here with my colleague Carl, and so we advocate for soil as a climate solution. And, obviously, so many other great panelists and speakers do as well, and it's becoming a universal thing, which is great. But we wanted our organization to, in the name, Soil4Climate. We didn't want there to be any mistake about it, but it could be anything, right? It could be soil for water, it could be soil for food, it could be soil for drought and flood mitigation, it could be soil for land equity, right? There's a million things that it could be, and it's all of it. So when it's ready, it will show up. Is that how this works? Okay. No worries. And a shout out, I guess maybe this is streaming to all the friends in the Soil4Climate Facebook group. So we've got a pretty active community now, about 12,600 members in the Facebook group. It's pretty active. There's something like 50,000 reactions a month or a week or whatever. It's a lot. And so I invite you to be part of that, and we're also having a meetup at Seared Restaurant in Petaluma on Wednesday. And if you could go to the event announcement for that, and if you're interested, just click on that. We'd appreciate it. So what else can I say in absence of the slides? Oh, is it happening now? Oh, okay. Okay, great. So we're Soil4Climate, like you heard, and so the main point here is that really, it's everything. It's the oceans, it's the atmosphere, it's the land. It's the whole thing. And something you also see in this slide is really just how thin the atmospheric layer is on the Earth. It's like paper thin, and so that's why people don't have trouble believing that we can affect the climate. Well, we really can, actually. And, one of the thesis that's out there is we've actually been affecting the climate since the dawn of the age of agriculture. So 10,000 years ago, we started affecting the climate by changing the biomass, by, plowing, changing trees. That's been affecting the climate for 10,000 years, which we've actually been holding off the next ice age. We should be already in the next ice age. And so global warming really started 10,000 years ago. Oh, by the way, I'm holding this. This is a Maasai talking stick because we do work with the Maasai in Kenya, and I'm going to announce that toward the end of the presentation. This is a great slide. This is from an exhibit at the U.S. Geological Society. That may not be quite right. I apologize, but the name of the exhibit was called Exposed: The Secret Life of Roots. And what's really cool about this is those are actual plant roots. They were grown in tubes, and it's placed against a backdrop, a photographic backdrop. But those are real plants. And you can even see at the bottom how they're folded. The roots go even deeper than that. So that's the solution to global warming, is the mitigation in the soil. I mean, that's carbon. That's why soil is dark, right? Carbon-rich soil is dark. But then when you plow the land or you destroy that ecosystem, you contribute to global warming. And that's one of the theses that's out there now, is we've actually been contributing to global warming for close to 10,000 years through the degradation of this. And okay. Yeah, so then in this slide, what you want to see here in the bottom left, see where it says soil 2300? That's 2,300 billion tons of carbon. Okay, that's what that's saying. Or 2.3 trillion tons of carbon in soil. And so even slight changes in soil organic matter around the world is a big difference in terms of the carbon that's in the atmosphere. And recently, of course, we've been talking about the emissions problem. This is an old slide. Again, this is in gigatons. That's kind of the number that most academic literature uses. It's actually closer to 11 now. We're at around 11 gigatons, or 11 billion tons of carbon through emissions every year. And there's 3 sinks, so this is called sources and sinks. And 2 of the sinks are bad. The oceans, it becomes carbonic acid. The atmosphere, you know about, becomes global warming. But the terrestrial sink is a good thing, right? There's a certain amount of natural uptake anyway. All we want to do is increase it a little bit. We just want to help nature, just get a little more. And there was a seminal paper that came out in 2009 by Susan Solomon, and it was called Irreversible: Climate Change Due to Carbon Dioxide Emissions. And this is, from her paper. This paper shows that climate change, okay, anyway, the basic point is that she says it's largely irreversible for 1,000 years after emissions stop. So it's not enough just to stop emissions. These warming impacts of what's already there go on for 1,000 years, at least. All right, and then she shows these are the graphs here. We don't have time to get into all that. Okay, that's 2009. Now, 4 years later, 2013, oops. Okay, 4 years later, 2013, the IPCC. This is really a very conservative organization by certainly the standards of this room. A large fraction of anthropogenic climate change resulting from CO2 emissions is irreversible. When the IPCC uses a term like irreversible, that's headline news. They're obviously referring to Susan Solomon's paper. You don't see a word like irreversible to show up, in IPCC or in peer review literature. That's a heavy term. Okay, on a multi-century to millennial scale. They're obviously referring to Susan Solomon's work. But look at this part which they add. Except in the case of a large net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere over a sustained period. Bang. That, to me, is the beginning of the drawdown narrative in academic policy circles. Right there. That sentence. That's where it starts. 2013. And that's what this is about. That's what we're about. Soil for climate. Where's the net drawdown going to go? Well, into soil, obviously. Now, I'm running out of time. There's obviously much more I want to talk about. So let me I'm just going to, I don't know how else to do it, but just fly through all these slides. And just looking at them, you'll get the point. We do a lot of work with holistic planned grazing and using livestock managed properly as a soil enhancing tool. And so a lot of these pictures are sort of self-explanatory. I don't really have time to explain it all now, but you kind of get the point. When you manage livestock properly, you can regenerate soil, which is a carbon drawdown solution. There's lots of stuff like this on our website, and so you can see it. Lots and lots of examples of land being restored. So I'm just really going to, well, yeah, we obviously don't have time for all that. Well, these slides are important. Just give me a second to talk about this. This is a paper from 2013. Let me go back to the title paper. It's called Global Cooling by Grassland Soils of the Geologic Past and Near Future. And so what he's talking about here is the evolution of basically what we call soil, grassland soils, which is most of the earth. It's actually sort of a new evolutionary development. It only really happened in the last 30 million years or so, and it happened as a co-evolution with ungulates and ruminants. So those two things are essential. And another paper in the same year came out called A 40 Million Year History of Atmospheric CO2. And I know these graphs are sort of weird, but the present is the left, and the deep past is the right. And you see around 30 million years ago, 35, there was a profound drop in atmospheric CO2. Well, I took the liberty of combining those two graphs from those two papers together, and bang. You see, the evolution of grassland soils co-evolved with ruminants is exactly correlated with the drop down of atmospheric CO2 over the last 30 million years. That's his thesis, that's our thesis. We wouldn't have the modern climate we have now without the evolution of grassland soils and ruminants. And then there's something called the C4 grass, and there's the most famous type called maize. So what we basically call today's crops are a recent evolutionary development co-evolved with soils and ruminants and CO2 drawdown. All right, so we just don't have time for all this, of course, but I just want to jump right to the part that I'm really excited about that I want to announce right now. We're doing a project in Kenya, and this is my colleague Dalmas with Judy Schwartz's book, Cows Save the Planet, and I love that picture. And so we're doing a project where we're going to do holistic planned grazing to help restore the ecosystem there and to do sort of sustainable economics, a regenerative business enterprise doing meat and dairy and even honey with beehives. And so they got training in holistic planned grazing, and this was just sort of a picture. And so this I just want to announce right now. So our program is called Enkup Osaligi, which in the Maasai language means promised land. And we're going to start small, a couple thousand hectares, 30 or 40 cows, but eventually, if we're going to really mitigate global warming, we need to expand greatly, and that is our vision. And so what do I want to announce today is that Nativa and John Rulak, one of the primary founders and sponsors of this conference, has generously given us a grant as part of their 1% for regenerative agriculture program. And through that grant, we're going to be able to launch this. So I want to thank them for that. Thank you very much. Okay, that's it. Thank you. A quick poem, sorry. A 35-second poem from the poet laureate of the soil carbon revolution.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Tiedemann, co-founder of Soil4Climate with Seth. My poem is called Climate Farming. So what's the future? Is there no hope? Healing the land can help us cope and grow better food with less flooding too. Put carbon in soil is what we must do. Draw down the heat, slow the sea rise, let birds and bees thrive in the skies. Good farming is how we deal with this mess. Now the climate's fixed, what's next to address? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Josie Watson from Massachusetts, a soil specialist and researcher.
Thank you so much. My name is Josie. I am a research assistant at Tufts GDay, but I'm currently working remotely from Vermont because it had always been my dream to farm on an organic farm in Vermont specifically, because I was born and raised in New England, and the beacon of regenerative agriculture in New England is the state of Vermont. So I'm currently living there, and I'm doing my research remotely from my apartment. I'm having a lot of phone conversations with everyone involved in the movement, but it's just such a treat to see so many of you in the same room. Just like we study a lot of microbial organisms, and we know they all have their specific function in the movement, and so just seeing so many people is reminding me of that. It's so good to see you all here. Oh yeah, okay, good. The PowerPoint's up. So Seth has done most of the hard work in walking through the complexities of the ecosystem functionings that underpin this movement. And what I've been focusing on is figuring out how we can maybe break through some of the bureaucracy at play at the government level in the farming system in this country right now to try and integrate ecological knowledge into the way those programs work. So I think it's just time for a massive eco-makeover of our agricultural governance systems. And we've been working on that as a project. Starting at the regional level of the Northeast United States, right? So my first step out of college was to intern for the Food and Agriculture Organization Global Soil Partnership. And this fact was being widely discussed at FAO, the fact that FAO oversees a lot of land management styles in multiple countries, and it's just now being realized and integrated into governance strategies that any way we treat land has a direct impact on climate and multiple other processes. A huge outcome of our land management is actually food and the quality of the food that is produced by land. This is my favorite graphic from the Global Soil Partnership of the FAO. It's an illustration of all of the ecosystem services that can be attributed to sustainable soil management. And in the Northeast, the way we manage land has impacts on environmental outcomes that, let's say, our state governments and certainly we as day-to-day citizens didn't necessarily process. Like the fact that if our roadways are being impacted by soil erosion and water runoff in a way that incurs huge damage costs, that has to do with the way our surrounding farms are managing their soil. And then of course the concept of food deserts and nutritional scarcity in one of the wealthiest countries of the world has been an acknowledged fact for about 10 years now. And working at FAO, there was this assumption amongst my colleagues that in the United States we would have, considered all of these intersections and started to bring together the overlap between our food system management and environmental management and human health and infrastructure costs and nutrient runoff and water quality. there was an assumption that the U.S. government was fostering teamwork and collaboration between its very well-funded departments that were approaching all these issues separately to come up with the most efficient possible way of managing all these things as a collective system. And I would say, okay, I need to do more research into this, and I would find, no, our departments approach every single problem separately, and they don't realize that if they invested in the point source of a lot of the problems, they could avoid spending money on all of the damages. And it just so happens that the point source of a lot of these problems on the board are the way we manage our soil health and the diversity of our farms. Nature abhors a monoculture. And we do have an organic food movement happening nationwide. We have a locavorism movement happening nationwide. And we have multiple grassroots organizations that have grown up as a way of creating and perpetuating this movement. And there are too many in California to count. I was born and raised in Connecticut, and still just the growing number of farms that were participating at farmers markets was visible, but there wasn't a real sense of what the network was like behind and supporting and advocating for this movement, and or I suppose fully outlining the details of the scope of the problem or the scope of the system that they were trying to provide an alternative to, which is our industrial agricultural system. And so getting back to the U.S., my research department, my advisor, and I agreed that if we were going to approach the question of revising government agricultural support programs from the soil health intersectional lens, that we were essentially talking about changing the philosophy of government evaluation of both land management and the food system as a whole, of transitioning the way our specialists think about land management as being practice-oriented, as being about specific actions that farmers take and the outcomes of those practices, that we needed to reformulate a holistic outcome, reframing the role that farmers play as land managers, so that the attitude of government programs is not that we need to determine specific practices that need to be transitioned to for land health, and we need to generate fund streams to help farmers financially transition to those practices, but to come up with a vision of what a healthy farm environmental system looks like. And because that concept is the same across multiple ecosystems, you can determine what a healthy soil sponge, what form that takes, and all of the ecosystem services that are tied to it. The species are going to be different, and the specific, state of the farm is going to be different depending on ecosystem and depending on the farms themselves. But the outcome of a healthy, vibrant farming ecosystem is the same. And our fund streams could be rechanneled towards those outcomes instead of standing as they are, going towards specific practices, or the USDA is spending about $34.5 billion in funding for commodity assistance and crop insurance programs. That is, case in point summarizes the direction of our funding. It's extremely specific, it's crop specific, and it's leading to the monoculture system producing crops that are less nutritious and so much cheaper. And our country is gravitating towards buying those products as a result of just this very specific funding mindset. So how do we fund a whole system, a vibrant system, was our question. And when you start with soil, you start to see that there's this coalescence that can happen between the conventional scientific method that's being used in agricultural departments and labs in terms of greenhouse gas reduction from the atmosphere. the study of evaluating the quantity of carbon dioxide that land systems can sequester and store pushes scientists to start evaluating the diversity of practices that are needed to help farms transition. So this concept that I suppose Ratan Lal is a figurehead of pioneering the concept of quantifying the amount of carbon dioxide that land can store opens the discussion forum in government departments like the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the EQIP office, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. All of these programs that developed separately with separate purposes can start measuring the same thing in the climate change era. It is carbon, and start to reach similar conclusions that these diverse practices that we see on the nation's most regenerative farms are the practices that are going to get the carbon outcomes. And our task is communicating it through all of the channels provided to us. We have a lot of different soil health tests that are just now pioneering biological evaluation systems. And the biggest hurdle that you come to when you're approaching governments, which are spending taxpayer dollars on the farming system and have the best intentions at heart, but we're entering an era where we need to extremely diversify and consolidate and integrate the programs that exist. The only way you can convey the argument is to use the existing science, right? I mean, we're coming from, not that, the grassroots movement alone can't accomplish our farming transition goals without the help of government. Our approach is just that the government has a ton of finances that could help us in the task. And we're just trying to figure out how to tap into those funds through speaking their language, but conveying our message from this room in their language. And so this is my favorite slide. Essentially, every one of these groups on this slide are actively working in Northeast states to approach one of the multiple aspects of implementing regenerative farming change. We have groups advocating for market-based expansion, increasing the access of our Northeast citizens to healthy, nutritious food, like the NOFAs, the Vermont Certified Organic Program, and Food Solutions New England. We have groups that are profiling practices that regenerate land health, and there's a huge diversity of practices, but they are profiling them on the most local level possible, which is the state level in our government system. And we have groups that are advocating for the social cohesion and social network that would bring a diversity of farmers from different backgrounds who maybe have been denied access to land in the past, so they can bring their diversity of traditional knowledge to the land and help restore diversity in our farming system just by way of their own personal experience. And we've noticed that these groups are not intercommunicating. And so because of that, we have every piece of the problem, we have a piece of the solution, every piece of the solution is possessed by members of each one of these groups. And if we can combine the soil health regeneration argument with the scientific language, with members of all of our groups speaking as a collective in the same room as our government department officials and our policymakers, we can lead to the formation of contributions to our state-level soil health policy that's attempting to open new windows for generating funding streams to our government departments. Our main mission was at first to form a coalition between all of these groups, but we figured out that in the current sphere of organizing, coalition is far too complex a project to embark on together. So instead, we're just trying to form a network and collect as much input as possible from each one of these groups so that all of their members feel more like a collective and recognize each other as being part of the same movement. And through that momentum and through our new eco-forward and farm whole system evaluation, knowledge and philosophy, we'll be able to shape state healthy soils policy, and I've been working on a website to outline more details about the state level policy action that's happening. And you can, approach me for more information if you need. I just don't have as much time to dive into it. But this is our window, the state level soil health policy. And once we can collect contributions and shape the soil health policy, it will provide us a direct pathway to finally getting government programs at the state level, Natural Resource Conservation Service and USDA offices, to change their programming. And that will, domino effect into impacting the Farm Bill and federal level USDA action. That's our thesis. That was very scattered, but I'm available for discussing this as long as you all need. Afterwards, you can come find me or email me. But yeah, that's what we're working on right now in the Northeast, so thank you so much.
Yes, I just want to say a few things, and then we'll have some time. The speakers can come up for discussions. Tomorrow I'm going to be doing a workshop at 2 o'clock in the Masonic Hall, 2 to 3:30. Basically, the topic of that workshop is how do we go from here? How do we build a powerful regeneration movement as part of a broader revolutionary movement in this country? The Green New Deal has attracted 650 groups that have endorsed it, some major labor unions. There's a lot of momentum out there. Next week in Washington, D.C., we're hosting a press conference on Capitol Hill, Farmers and Ranchers for a Green New Deal. We've had 10,000 farmers and ranchers across the country not only speak out in support of this regenerative agriculture, but also who understand that politically, if we connect regenerative agriculture to transformative economic change and political revolution, as Bernie Sanders puts it, we can possibly drive this really rapidly through. So I just wanted to point out a couple things. On the international level, what's changed even since last year, Soil Not Oil, is that the climate crisis is now a hot-button issue throughout the world. There is no doubt about this. There is consensus now that we must reduce emissions by at least 50% in the next decade. But the role of the United States movement, I'm very proud to say the Sunrise Movement, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, endorsed now by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and a number of others, is that we got to reach zero net emissions by 2030. The IPCC is, as usual, they're too little too late. If we rest on the laurels of saying, yeah, we're going to reach zero emissions, and we're not even clear about, are we talking zero emissions or zero net emissions by 2050, it's going to be too late. Countries are going to start saying in the 2040s, well, we tried and we just couldn't make it, No. As the youth in leading the Sunrise Movement and the climate movement have pointed out, and Fridays for the Future, the nationwide demos that'll be on the 20th of September, that I hope we'll all be attending, have pointed out the United States has an obligation. 28% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere were put up there by the United States. We per capita are the largest producers of climate instability and greenhouse gases in the world. We got to lead the way. We're the richest country in the world. We are not being shot down in the streets. for talking about these things. We have the capacity. Okay, this year, we've been beating our heads against the wall. I know I've been going for 9 years to these global climate summits, and we have not gotten the kind of recognition for regenerative food farming and land use that we needed to get. This year, we're going to get it in Chile. This year, agriculture, food, forestry issues, ecological restoration are going to play a major role. And all the countries of the world that are coming together and all the civil society and activist organizations, we're going to have a much larger presence. So I'd like to invite any of you that want to join the Regeneration International delegation to Chile, December 2nd through the 13th. Contact me at this conference. We have some housing that we've already established. We've got great meeting spaces, and we've got an emerging global network that is working together. It's pretty exciting. On the political front, it's hard for some of us to realize that we have had a huge impact, along with the climate movement, on the politics of this country. The Trump administration is going to pass here rather quickly. And look at what the leading contenders for the presidency are saying about climate change. I mean, they're addressing the fact it's a climate emergency, but they're also pointing out how regenerative practices and soil sequestration are a major solution. Bernie Sanders' recent plan, I'd urge you to read it. Go to the website of organicconsumers.org and read the article that I wrote last week about the Bernie plan. It's 67 pages, but it's pretty exciting, especially the part about food farming and land use. What's really exciting is that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, who seem to be cooperating together, are now the leading contenders. I mean, Biden is going to fade. Our next president is going to be either Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. That is that. And we have been in communication with their staffs, we and some of our affiliates, and we and the farmers we work with have had a big impact on the platforms that they're putting out there. If you think sometimes, oh my God, I could have written that. Well, it's because our colleagues are writing those. And our trick is now to get the candidates themselves to understand as fully as we do what their platforms say. But one group that we've really gotten through to is Bernie's group. Okay, Bernie's ag advisors are on our wavelength. If you look at some of the things that Bernie talked about in the Green New Deal proposal for just food and farming, it's a $16.3 trillion project over 15 years. I mean, it's adequate to get the job done. But just in the food farming, he's talking about $410 billion. This is not million. This is $1 billion to help farmers and ranchers make the transition to climate-friendly regenerative practices. $410 billion. Now that's, and we're talking about stop these subsidies, the $34 billion in subsidies for degenerative food and farming and land use. He's talking about $160 billion, billion again, we're not talking million, paid to farmers directly for sequestering carbon on their farms and ranches. $25 billion for farmland conservation. $1.25 billion for Native American tribal land access and acquisition. I mean, we have ignored and exploited Native communities long enough. It's time to turn things around. $1.4 billion in new research and development. There's a lot of good scientists and researchers out there who, if they have adequate funds, are going to really help the cause. $1.4 billion for renewable energy on farms. $36 billion to establish, I love this one, to establish a Victory Lawns and Gardens initiative to turn urban and suburban areas into food-producing, carbon sequestering. And again, that's 36 billion, not million. 14 billion, I love this. Co-op grocery stores. You know, I've worked for co-op grocery stores for 40 years, almost 50 years now. First one I worked at was in 1969. And, you know, these are incredible places. And Bernie's saying, hey, let's put $14 billion into expanding retail co-op grocery stores. Now that is a good idea. $31 billion to strengthen local infrastructure for on-farm and local processing of foods. $31 billion. $160 billion to eliminate food waste and have cities and counties develop composting programs that can feed into organic and regenerative agriculture. That's $160 billion. That will do the job. I like $500 million to pay for farmers to go organic who want to. This to me this is not some wishful thinking. This is the leading contender for the President of the United States saying this. We can make this happen if we have a ballot box revolution in 2020 that goes along with our regenerative revolution. And I just want to say that we are not forgetting about climate justice and shutting down big oil and big coal, you know, and eliminating these pipelines and getting rid of internal combustion engines and leaving the remaining fossil fuel carbons in the ground as quickly as possible. This, without that wing of the movement, it doesn't matter what we do in the regeneration movement. But now what they're starting to see is that without us, without the regenerative food farming land use movement, it's not going to be enough to move very rapidly to alternative energy. And finally, I just want to make a plea for international solidarity and awareness. I love it that Bernie's program has $200 billion to help countries overseas develop green economies, to get away from fossil fuels and to develop regenerative practices. But we need to understand very clearly that most of the carbon that's going to get sequestered in time to prevent catastrophe must occur in the global south. That's all there is to it. If we continue to have a movement that is focused just nationally, if we continue to let areas like Central America and Mexico just suffer through drug wars and, you know, standard U.S. imperialist foreign policy, we're not going to get there. I've seen practices on everyday farms in Mexico that can sequester more carbon than our best carbon ranchers. That's not to say that our best carbon ranchers aren't important. It's just to say that we got 570 million farmers in the world. And we have to build a movement, an international movement, to where they sequester carbon. And it's much easier to sequester carbon in certain climates where you already have degraded soil and we can rapidly move forward. So there's a bunch of literature I finally wanted to say on the counter out there from Regeneration International, from Farmers and Ranchers for a Green New Deal. Please pick that up. And anyone who wants to be involved in a nationwide Speakers Bureau and network building campaign that's starting next month, please contact me. And we've got about 15 minutes left for if the speakers can just come up to the front if anyone has questions. And I guess if we don't have if there aren't any burning questions, we can just have concluding comments from each of the speakers.
There's a couple of questions. There are some questions.
Can someone who hears better than me?
There's none right there.
Yes.
The glasses?
Can you speak up for your question?
Stand up.
My question is about all of us people about climate accident. We don't seem to be getting up to the soil level. That's right. No, right.
I think you're best equipped to answer this one.
The Bill McKibben question?
Okay, Bill knows about Soil for Climate. One of the pictures I zipped through was him holding our sign. And we're colleagues, we text each other. So, but that movement started in the 80s, and the emphasis then was on fossil fuels, and so they're sort of that side of it. And as Ronnie just said, if they're not successful, we're not going to solve it either. So I don't want to fault them for not being interested in soil or whatever. I mean, they're focused like a laser beam on stopping the pipelines and everything, and God bless them for that. I just want to leave it at that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in our outreach, Organic Consumer Association, Regeneration International across the country, we're finding lots of chapters of 350.org, Sierra Club, and others, church peace groups and so on, the Citizens Climate Lobby and so on. Just because the national leaders aren't necessarily yet speaking out about how regenerative food farming and land use was half of the solution doesn't mean that there aren't thousands and thousands of rank and file people that are ready to work with us now. And as we build our local and regional coalitions, we need representatives from all these groups, even if it's not the executive directors.
There's some question back there. The fellow back there, I saw you. Yeah, please stand.
I'm curious for you to discuss, you said that the plan is about $600 billion. I'm curious to discuss where the money would come from and how are we going to how can that help the economy? Where would the $600 billion come from? And how would it actually continue to grow?
Well, there's a couple of articles that I know I posted up on our website, Organic Consumers Association. How do we pay for a Green New Deal? That are very interesting. And one of the things is to look at how the New Deal was paid for in the 30s. Most people don't understand that basically the New Deal paid for itself because a lot of these were loans that were paid back, very low interest loans. A lot of these were tax creating methods, putting millions of people to work in the Civilian Conservation Corps who didn't have jobs before, and so on and so forth. So basically, there is a way, and there's good writers writing about it. Ellen Brown, right here from California, is one of the leading economic theorists about how we can pay for a Green New Deal. Ellen says we can easily put $2 trillion a year into the economy right now without causing undue inflation. But I think the most important thing Bernie Sanders pointed out at the town hall last week on CNN, the climate town hall. He said, what are we talking about? Can we afford to stop the meltdown, of society and climate catastrophe? This is like, we must do this. This is not a question of, is it going to make inflation go up a little bit or make wealthy people's taxes go up? This is survival we're talking about, And I know that my parents in the 40s, in 1941, they did not debate, can we afford to defeat the Nazis? Can we afford to just let the world fall into catastrophe? No, it's not even a serious concern on the moral and ethical grounds. We have got to do this, and I'm just happy that someone like Bernie Sanders has drawn inspiration from us, from the grassroots, to have the guts to stand up and say, this is not going to cost $2 trillion, $3 trillion. This is going to cost at least $16 trillion. And this is not talking about Medicare for all and eliminating student debt and all that. We're going into a political revolution, or we're going into catastrophe. So. raising the hell out of taxes on the rich, you know. We're going to raise the hell out of taxes on the billionaires. We're going to make corporations pay their full share, but that's not primarily what's going to pay for this.
Next question. Okay, Canyon.
As a citizen of this land, I ask you, even speakers, as well as many people in the room, how are you on our native land, using the stewards of these territories in all of the places we occupy, when indigenous people have been stewing the land for thousands and thousands and thousands of years? How can we be able to make insight from that knowledge and wisdom? How are you speakers, even including or to you, on our native land?
What's your name? What's your name? Canyon. Wow. Thank you so much. I think, you know, in the project we've been doing, we are working around the concept of workshops and bringing multiple people to the table with members of our government and our policymakers. And one of our first attempts was to reach out, instead of to, you know, there are plenty of scientific offices who are analyzing current farming practices and their impact on soil health. Our theory was you don't necessarily even need to get them in the room. If you can contact some members of native tribes of Massachusetts or Vermont and ask them about their agricultural heritage, and if they're willing to share, then that's essentially all of that our government programs need to pay attention to, and we're really pushing for it. But there's a lot of distrust. Like, a lot of effort needs to be put into building trust.
Hi, let me just answer Kenyon's question real quick. You saw the presentation they gave toward the end, the project we're doing with the Maasai. I want to give you just a quick evolution of the name of the project. This shows how geeky and dorky I am. I originally wanted to call it Hectares of Hope. Now, my Maasai colleague said no. And I said, why? Now, this is the interesting point. He says, because we consider the word hectares a term of imperialism. Okay? He said, we don't have that term. It means dividing and conquering. And I was like, oh, well, what do you call it? He said, we call it land. Okay? So that project, it's called Enkup Osaligi, that's the Maasai term for promised land. So that's their name for their project. And we're serving as the fiscal agent, if you will, you know, to channel the money to help them manage it. So that's, I hope, is a good way to respect the traditional peoples of Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Canyon, for your question. We are, with our platform and our tool, we're open for anybody to suggest things for it. So we want to make sure that we have robust offerings from every segment of society. And it's open for anybody to use, too. So it's all open source. So it's just kind of interactive. So I'd love to continue the conversation during break.
Yes, and one thing we've noticed in attending native organic conferences around the country is there's more and more discussion of regenerative. And I work with one group called the Thunder Valley Development Corporation, Pine Ridge Reservation, a Native American group that is doing some amazing work with regenerative poultry project, and also the bringing back the buffalo economy, the 100% grass-fed regenerative grazing buffalo. So I think that we've got a tremendous future ahead. We need some serious money that we need to take out of the pockets of people who don't deserve it and hand it back to Native American organizations to buy back the beginning of a lot of that land that's been stolen from them. That's an excellent part of Bernie's program. And yes, it is true, the original regenerative farmers are our indigenous ancestors, and that's what we're learning from and recapturing. Thanks.
We're out of time. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.